you asking yourself, why should I buy a house? I know rates are super low right now and buying is a great idea, but renting is just so easy and I'm already doing it. Why should I change my mind? Why should I go from renting to buying? What are the benefits? Let's go over those in today's video. Renting versus buying, pros and cons, starting right now. Hi, I'm Untitled, the XP Realty. I hope you had a great weekend and are looking forward to the week ahead. If you're new to my channel, please hit the subscribe button down below. Hit the bell button to be notified of new videos that drop every Monday at 10 a.m. Be sure to like this video and share it with your friends and family. Now let's get started. Let's talk about renting first. Pro number one to renting are lower costs. When you rent, you're generally only responsible for your rent every month. You're not responsible for any repair costs, anything that breaks down in the apartment, any leaky roofs, anything like that. All you're responsible for is your rent. Sure, you pay for insurance and taxes indirectly through your rent, but you don't have to remember to pay that every month. So it's definitely a big plus. Historically, renting is usually cheaper than buying a home. However, the last few years with interest rates so low, that's not necessarily the case anymore. So definitely before you rent or buy, check the rates in your area and see if renting is cheaper than buying. You may be surprised. Benefit number two to renting is a shorter commitment. Leases are typically a year at a time. So every year your lease renews. You can decide if you want to stay in that place or if you want to move. So if you like to move around the country a lot, or maybe you have a job that transfers you a lot, renting is probably the best option for you, just because you don't have that hassle of trying to sell a house before you move. Rentals also, of course, come in other lease types. There's 6-month leases, there's month-to-month leasing. It all just kind of depends on what works best for you and what works best for the landlord. So if you like to move around a lot, or you're not sure if you're going to like that area, you probably want to start renting first before you decide to buy a house. Advantage number three of renting, you don't need as much money up front. Typically when you rent, you're going to need your security deposit and maybe 1 or 2 months worth of rent to put down on the place. When you buy a house, of course, you have the down payment, which is a percentage of the purchase price, plus all the closing costs. So your money to acquire an apartment is a lot less than it is to buy a house. Your credit also plays a factor. Typically when you rent, some landlords don't do a credit check at all. Some do, but they don't care if your credit is subpar or a little less than okay. So if you're working on your credit to buy a house, renting is probably the best option for you right now. Landlords may check your credit. They'll be okay with somebody that's working on their credit. Typically when they check your credit, they're kind of looking for evictions. They want to see that you haven't had any evictions in the last couple of years. So if you're a good tenant that hasn't been evicted from your apartment recently, you should be okay when they check your credit. Now, let's talk about some disadvantages of renting. Disadvantage of renting number one, no tax incentives. As a homeowner, you can write off certain things such as your property taxes and your mortgage you pay on the interest you pay on your mortgage every year at the end of the year for tax time. When you're renting, obviously you can't do that because you're not paying property taxes and there's no interest on a mortgage because you don't have a mortgage. So number one, there's no tax incentive to renting. You don't get a bigger check at the end of the year from the government. Disadvantage number two of renting is that your housing costs are not fixed. When you rent, when your lease is up every year or 6 months or every month, depending on your lease term, your landlord can decide to raise your rent. When you buy a house, you're locked into a fixed mortgage for 15 or 30 years, where your principal and your interest payments stay the same for that whole time. They never change. So that's one big disadvantage of renting, is that year to year, you never know what your rent payment is going to be. You have a good idea. Usually your landlord will only raise it, 50 or 100 bucks, but you never know how much they're going to raise it to. Disadvantage number three of renting is you build no equity. So when you buy a house, typically home values go up every year. So you can turn around and sell your house in 5 to 7 years and make a little extra money on when you bought it. When you rent, there's no equity. You don't own any part of that rental property or that building. So when the landlord goes to sell it, you don't get a cut of the profit. You just pay rent to somebody else. So there's no building equity when you rent. Next, let's talk about the pros and cons of buying a home. Let's start with the cons, since I like to end on the positive. Con number one is you're making a long-term commitment when you buy a house. Mortgages are usually 15 to 30 years long. So even if you don't stay in the house for the whole 15 or 30 years, you plan on staying in that one area for a long period of time. Sure, you can turn around and sell your house in 5 to 7 years. Selling is not always that easy. Right now we're in a seller's market and selling is super easy. Houses are flying off the shelves, but that won't last forever. Once the market cools down, it's not so much of a seller's market. It may take you 6 months to a year to sell your house. And if you need to move quickly, say for a job transfer, it's not as easy to do that when you own a home as it is when you're renting. Con number two to owning a house is maintenance and repair costs. So when you rent, if something breaks down in your apartment, you just call your landlord and they come fix it. You don't have to pay for a new roof. There's no maintenance. You don't pay for painting of the outside, replacing decks, anything like that. When you own a home though, you're responsible for everything. So your furnace breaks down, you have to pay for a new one. And furnaces can be expensive. They start off about $3,000. Your roof starts leaking, you need a new roof, you're responsible for a new roof. New roofs start off at about $8,000 to $10,000 and go up from there depending on the house that you have. In order to make sure that your home keeps appreciating so that you can sell it for a profit down the road, you have to maintain it and repair it properly. Con number 3 to owning a house is that historically, mortgages are more expensive than renting. Now in the last couple of years, because the interest rates are near zero, that is not the case at all. Usually buying is cheaper than renting right now because there are no apartments to rent, so landlords have jacked up the prices. But as they raise interest rates and things start to switch into more of an even or even a buyer's market, that will change and renting may become more cheaper than buying. But historically, having a mortgage is cheaper than renting. So definitely check the rates in your area. See what the average rental rate is in your area and see what you could possibly get a mortgage for if you're looking to do something now. Con number 4 to buying a house is there's high upfront costs when you buy a home. You have to bring a lot of money to the closing table. Bring the down payment to the closing table, which is a percentage of the sales price of the house, usually 3 to 20% depending on the loan type you have and how much money you have in the savings account. You also need to bring prepaid to the closing table. So you're prepaying for your taxes for the year and you're prepaying homeowner's insurance for the year. And you have to pay whatever lender fees there are. Your lender charges you a fee for giving you your loan. You have to bring those to the closing table as well. So buying a house, definitely there's a lot more upfront costs when it comes to buying a house. Con number 5 to buying a house is the risk of foreclosure. So if you fall behind on your mortgage and you can't pay it, and the bank ends up foreclosing on you, now granted this process takes months and months and months, so you have time to catch up on your mortgage payment if you do fall behind. But if you do get foreclosed on, it's a big deal. It ruins your credit and it stays on your credit profile for at least 7 years. So if you get foreclosed on, you won't be able to buy a house for at least another 2 years with an FHA loan. And if you go to rent someplace, they'll find that in your credit background and they may not rent you anything either. So make sure when you're buying a house, you can afford the house. You're not stretching yourself too thin. Now, let's get into the advantages of buying a house. Advantage number 1 is privacy. It's just you and your family that live there. It's a lot easier to go upstairs and tell your teenager to turn that music down than it is to tell your 20-year-old neighbor that lives above you to turn their music down. Your teenager will probably listen to you. The 20-year-old neighbor that lives above you may or may not listen to you. You don't have neighbors on either side of you, just drywall away. Drywall is usually, 6 inches thick. When you own your house, you may have neighbors close to you, but they're not just a wall away from you. So there's definitely privacy there. If you're a person that doesn't like to talk to anybody, it's a lot easier to just go to and from your house to the garage and not talk to any of your neighbors ever if you don't want to. When you live in an apartment complex and you have to walk from your garage to your front door, or through a common hallway, you're more apt to run into your neighbors and have to talk to them. Me personally, I love talking to people, especially my neighbors. I know some people out there, they're very private people and they don't like to do that. Advantage number 2 to owning a house is that it's a good investment and it builds equity. As I said earlier, home values go up almost every year and most people stay in their houses 5 to 7 years before they sell it. So hopefully when you decide to sell your house is worth a lot more than we paid for it. So when you do sell it in that 5 to 7 years, you're making a nice profit on your house. So you can take that money and put it towards another house or wherever you plan on doing. Advantage number 3 to owning a house, as I mentioned before, your housing costs are more stable than they are when renting. When you have a house, you have a mortgage. That's either a 15 or 30-year mortgage. Your principal and your interest payment stay the same for that whole 15 or 30 years. Actually, as you get closer to paying the house down, you get closer to that 15 or 30-year market, your payments may actually become less because you pay less and less interest as you get closer to the end of your payments. So if you're trying to create a family budget, owning a house is easier than renting because you know what your monthly payment is going to be for the next 15 or 30 years. Whereas when you rent, your housing payment can go up every year, every time your lease renews. Advantage number 4 to owning a house, it's just that pride of ownership that you have in your house. Homeowners are shown to be more prideful of their house. They take better care of it than they do of rental properties. They like to landscape it, like to keep it maintained, like to keep the house value up so that when they do decide to sell, they're making profit on the house. You just have that pride of ownership. You also just feel part of the community. Because you're paying property taxes now every year, you feel like you have more of a say in what happens in your community. Whether you go to town hall meetings or not, you just kind of feel like you're more a part of the community than you do when you're renting. Advantage number 5 to owning a home, and probably the biggest advantage for most homeowners when they have it, are the tax incentives. Homeownership grants you tax breaks at the end of the year. Talk to your tax advisor, of course, to see which tax breaks are best for you and which ones you can use. But typically, at the end of the year, you're able to write off your property tax payment that you make to the city or state. You're also able to write off the interest you pay on your loan every year. Of course, you don't get that whole amount back in your taxes at the end of the year, but you get a portion of it. So that helps to make that tax check at the end of the year in April, whenever you file your taxes, a little bit bigger when you're a homeowner as compared to when you're a renter. After going through all the advantages and disadvantages of home ownership and renting, which one's best for you, renting or buying a house? Let me know down in the comments. Is there anything that you would add to this list? Any other advantages or disadvantages to either homeownership or renting? Let me know that also. I look forward to your comments. Give me a call, text, or email anytime, and I'd be happy to discuss your options with you so we can go through it and see if renting's best for you or if buying a house is best for you right now. Check out any of my other videos that are on my page here about buying or selling a house. I'm happy to help you guys and can't wait to hear from you. I'm Chad Scott with eXp Realty. Please remember to subscribe to my channel, hit the like button, and hit the bell to be notified of new videos every week. Have a fantastic week, and I'll see you guys right here next week on Monday.